Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for a few thoughts from the Bible. My Bible reading plan has recently taken me through the book of Jonah in the Old Testament. It's a pretty well-known story, I think. This prophet, Jonah, who is told by God to go and preach repentance to the people of Nineveh, basically Israel's greatest enemy. And Jonah, he says, no, I am not doing that, God. And so he runs away and he ends up on a ship fleeing from God's instruction, fleeing from what he was supposed to be doing. And he ends up being thrown overboard from that ship and being swallowed by some kind of great big fish. And from the depths of his despair, in a place where he was thinking of himself as good as dead, possibly he even thought that he had already died, in that place of absolute despair, absolute darkness, Jonah cried out to God. And there are some amazing lessons that we can learn from this moment in Jonah's life. Firstly, we need to cry out in the place of despair. We need to cry out from the place of hardship. Jonah chapter 2 and verse 1 says that from inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He didn't wait until the fish had spit him out. He didn't wait until the situation had started to improve. He cried out from in the midst of his despair. We don't have to wait until we're in a good place to say, God, I need your help here. This is really hard and I can't do this on my own. We can cry out in the midst of the situation that we are finding impossible to overcome. Even if that situation that we find ourselves in is our own fault, as it was for Jonah, we can still cry out to God from right in the middle of it. Secondly, the second lesson from this chapter in Jonah is that it is okay to not be okay. In Jonah chapter 2 verse 3, Jonah says, "You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me." As I was reading that through this time, I was struck by that description because it's such an evocative descriptive sentence from Jonah, and you can picture how he was feeling as the ocean sort of dragged him down. But I also thought how accurate a description that is for when we feel just overwhelmed by circumstances. It can feel as though we are being buffeted by the waves, because it's never just one thing, is it? You know, when one thing goes wrong, it's normally like 2 or 3 other things as well happening at the same time. And it can feel as though we're starting to sink beneath the water and we just don't know how to make it back to the surface where everything made sense. It is okay to not be okay. It's okay to talk about how you are feeling and how things are going to God. It's okay, just as Jonah did, to say, right now, I don't know what to do because I just cannot survive this on my own. Cry out in the place of despair and recognize that it's okay to not be okay. But thirdly, in that place of despair, we need to look to God again. In verse 4 of Jonah chapter 2, Jonah says, "I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again to your holy temple." Now, I've never found myself in the belly of a giant fish to know exactly what it would have looked like, but I'm sort of picturing that it would have been completely dark, that Jonah wouldn't have been able to see anything. He had no idea what direction the temple of the Lord was in whilst being swam around beneath the ocean. What he means by this was, I will turn my eyes off my situation and I will look to God again. The temple of the Lord was the place where God's presence on earth resided. Jonah was saying, yes, I've looked away, but right now I am looking back to you, God. I am fixing my eyes on you. It's all too easy to look at what's going wrong, to look at the hard things, to think constantly about the situations that we're struggling with and how we're going to fix them and how we're going to get through it and what's going to happen, when what we really need to do is to look to God instead. And finally, the last lesson from this little passage of Jonah is to praise through the pain. Jonah chapter 2, 8-9 says this: those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. Now remember where Jonah is right now. He is still in the belly of this fish. He hasn't heard from God, as far as we know, to say that he would be delivered. As far as he knows, this is the end of the road. This is it. There is no deliverance. There is no rescue from this situation. And yet, even in that place, he shouts out with thanksgiving and with worship, and he commits to turning away from idols, to turning away from anything that he has made more important than God. And in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of the despair, he remembers where his salvation comes from. And it spurs him on to praise. Sometimes praise is a sacrifice. Sometimes what we're going through is so hard, we don't know how to lift up our voices in worship to God because it all seems too hard. But we need to praise through the pain. We need to keep praising and worshiping even when we find ourselves in that situation where we just can't see a way out. Because that is how we will deal with despair. That is how we will conquer those situations that seem beyond us, by crying out in that place, by recognizing it is okay that we're not always okay, by looking to God again, and by praising through the pain. There will be times in all of our lives where we face moments of the deepest, darkest despair. And this is a fantastic model for defeating it. Thank you so much for joining me today for those few thoughts from the Bible. I will be back on Friday next week with another video, so I will see you then.